Hey folks, I'm Doug Turnbull here in my NASCAR man cave, and I want to, instead of doing my race capsule the normal way, I want to do it in video form and sort of give you a rundown of what I felt about things and some of the controversies that ensued after the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series race at Richmond International Raceway this weekend. And what a race it was. Take away all the chase implications, all of the math, all of the who's in, who's out. It was actually a pretty good race, right? You had a bunch of different leaders. You had a surprise winner at the end in Carl Edwards, who's not known for his short track prowess, who's lost a race at Richmond before, if you remember back in 2012, the restart controversy there. And he was able to go to victory lane. He gets his second win of the season, 3 precious bonus points. You know how those bonus points work. They could really help him out in the chase. If he'd had 3 more bonus points back in 2011, he would have been Sprint Cup Series champion if he'd had just one more win or even one better finishing spot in that chase. But as things shook out, he was the winner. But let's sort of rewind and look what happened in the laps coming up toward that. First off, Edwards was able to gain the lead after a sequence of pit stops that occurred because of a caution there just with a few laps to go. Ryan Newman was leading up until that caution point. Martin Truex Jr. was a good ways behind him, and if Newman had won the race regardless of Truex's finish, Newman would have made the chase because it would have been his second win of the year, and Truex's only one other win would have been on the outside looking in. Well, make that Truex's teammate, Truex Jr.'s teammate Clint Bowyer spins. Wasn't intentional, was it not? You know, it seems like there's a lot of evidence pointing to it because he just sort of spun out on his own, and that brings out the caution. Newman not only loses the lead, but Truex is able to gain some spots as well and ends up finishing 7th in the race, and that really helps his chances there as he's able, by tying Ryan Newman in points, he had one more second place finish, and he was able to make the chase. Newman didn't take the race win. He did finish 3rd. That was pretty good, and considering what he came from and how he and Truex Jr. were both running mid-pack the entire race, they were able to do pretty well and make this very interesting. On the other side of things with the chase, you had Jeff Gordon. He led the first 49 or so laps of the race, and then fell back through the field, was really only a top 15 car toward the race's midpoint, and then he had trouble. He had a vibration, and he had to pit just after a green flag segment there, and there had been some pit stops under a caution flag before that. He loses a couple of laps, falls to 25th, and Gordon seems to be down and out. He wasn't even in the conversation, but as the 24 comes back to life, the number 22 of Joey Logano, who started inside the top 10, fades all the way back to 26th place, falls a couple of laps down, and suddenly Joey Logano, as Gordon comes back, Gordon pops into the top 10 in points, Joey Logano pops outside the top 10 in points, and we had a situation where Gordon would have made the chase, Logano would have made the chase, and neither Truex or Newman would have made the chase for the second wild card spot. But then as things unfolded, that last caution occurs. Logano's able to take a free pass and get back around the lead lap. He ends up finishing 22nd. Gordon only 8th, and that's not enough to make up the difference right there. Gordon falls outside the top 10 in points and misses the chase after just barely making the chase at Richmond last year. He misses it now, and Joey Logano makes his first ever chase of his career. Truex Jr., it'll be his 3rd chase career appearance. Casey Kane, the other wild card driver with 2 wins this season, was a non-factor at Richmond and really was not even mentioned hardly the whole weekend, except that he was the first wild card driver. So Casey Kane, count him in. Other drivers that could have been on the outside looking in, Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch was the best car of the race. Kurt Busch probably should have won. Things didn't shake out to where he could be the top driver at the very end, and he ends up with a solid top, I believe, a second place finish, and is able to secure 8th place in points, makes the chase even with 0 wins. Furniture Row Racing becomes the first single-car team ever to make it into the NASCAR chase, and this is the 10th season. It'll be since 2004. So Furniture Row Racing, very impressed with Kurt Busch, a driver who's bolting for Stewart-Haas next year. Very good, and hopefully they could deliver and turn some heads in the NASCAR playoffs. But there is more. So there was talk about Clint Bowyer's spin, the spin gate, if you will. Of course, he says it wasn't intentional. Everybody says they had no idea what was going on. But also, Bowyer finishes 2 laps down the race, seemed to be running slow on the racetrack to try to help others gain or lose positions there. And Brian Vickers, the other teammate of Martin Truex Jr.'s, he runs slow as well, and somehow that's able to gain some points for Martin Truex Jr. So they have the big teammate thing working, and sort of on the flip side of that, Ryan Newman and his Stewart-Haas Racing teammates not doing much to help him out. He could have had Danica Patrick spin out. He could have had Mark Martin not take 0 tires and stay out and gain all that track position and finish in front of him, could Ryan Newman. Now, eventually Newman did pass Mark Martin, but still, the 14 car, what was going on with all that? And so you have to wonder, Stuart Haas just trying to play the game cleanly. Michael Waltrip Racing not so much. And the fans are up in arms. My take, NASCAR, if they were going to call a penalty on it, they knew what was going on during the race. They should have done that. Now it may be too late to really do so much, but it's a part of racing. Having teammates alter the outcome of the race, that's how it goes. Now, back to some other chase hopefuls. Brad Keselowski had to win. Had to win to pretty much make the chase. Yes, he could have done the pole vault into the top 10 in points, but winning is really what would have assured him a spot in the NASCAR playoffs to defend his 2012 Sprint Cup Series title. Keselowski was doing that. He ran up front several times, led the most laps in the race, but under a green flag sequence, he fell from about first to sixth, so when he gave up the ghost there, including kind of getting into it with Kevin Harvick on the racetrack, it seemed like Keselowski gave up. Then, of course, Jimmy Johnson's very much inopportune caution came out during a green flag sequence where Keselowski had pitted and some of the other leaders had not. It pinned him back to where he took a wave around and was at the back of the lead lap and never recovered. In fact, he only finished 17th, and he had 2 restarts to try to gain some spots, but 17th is what he could muster. He misses the chase. He'd made the chase in 2011 and 2012 and missed it back in his first full season in 2010. Jamie McMurray, Paul Menard, yeah, they could have made it. They didn't make the cut. They would have had to go a long, long ways toward making it. It was a shame to see Ryan Newman not. Some other drivers that we thought maybe would have had a better race at Richmond that really weren't involved necessarily in the chase in or out conversation. Denny Hamlin was a non-factor, finished outside the top 20, ran pretty much in the 15th or so position throughout the night and was never really in the conversation for the race. Kyle Busch was only 19th. He won last week at Atlanta. That seems like a long time ago, and at a track where he usually contends, Kyle Busch not in the conversation. And then there's Jimmy Johnson, who was in the conversation for the wrong reasons. He started from the back of the pack, drove all the way up through the pack to about 28th or so. I say all the way, just some of the way through the pack, and then stalled out. And he hovered in the 30th or so position for much of the night. And then he had issues where he had to go to pit road with a mechanical problem. They actually went behind the wall, so that took him out of any kind of chance of contending. And then when he came back in the race, he cut a tire during that green flag sequence that pinned Keselowski and some others down, and he was out of the event pretty much totally by then. He finished well outside the top 30, so not a good momentum shift at all for the 48 team. As Bristol, Michigan, and Atlanta were all tough on that team, and now you add Richmond in the mix. Pretty much 4 bad finishes in a row for Jimmy Johnson, and he needs more than that if he wants to be a contender for the points championship, but he still will be second seeded in the chase standings as Matt Kenseth with the most wins, 5 this season, will be first. Kyle Busch and Jimmy Johnson tied at 4 wins apiece, and then you go down the list through the others there. We know who made the chase. Some drivers with 0 wins that made it: Kurt Busch and Clint Boyer, who remember we just talked about spinning out, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. So 3 drivers actually make the chase that have 0 wins. All of them were in the top 10 in points. It was an interesting night at Richmond. The night before, Brad Keselowski goes to victory lane on another questionable restart. Carl Edwards and Paul Menard's restarts there at the very end of the race was questionable. Friday night, it was the same way, but Brad Keselowski outdoes Brian Scott, who had led 293 straight laps to start the race, and there were only 300 in the race, and Keselowski goes to victory. Brian Scott will have to wait yet another week to try to claim his first Nationwide Series crown, and he's been in that series since 2010, so do the math there. And also we're talking about how the Georgia drivers finished. Not well. Breed Sorensen was the best of those. He was about 27th or so, not a factor. And then Brett Butler failed to qualify for the race. Chase Miller starting part. So there you kind of have it for the Sprint Cup Nationwide Series. As I'm talking, the trucks are underway right now, and Chase Elliott finishes no better than 31st. He crashes early with a flat tire. So we'll get more of that updated later on here on the WSB Race Blog. For now, I'm Doug Turnbull. Hope you enjoy things too much, and I hope you don't stop watching NASCAR just because there was a little controversy. Yeah, it was screwbally what happened there with the Michael Waltrip racing cars, but that's what happens at racing sometimes, whether we like it or not. So enjoy yourselves, folks. Have a great chase, and I'll talk to you soon. Signing off.